everyone, and welcome to the third and final presentation that I've recorded for you on communication and the coach. And what I would like to discuss with you today is the importance of our ability to be able to manage conflict. And managing conflict includes the ability to manage the complex, distressing, uncomfortable feelings and behaviors that can sometimes be presented by our clients. And sometimes you might find as coaches that you're working in with couples. You might be doing some relationship work, or you might be working in the workplace where your client feels in conflict with their organization, with their line manager, with their colleagues. And so you might find that at some point in your work as a life coach that managing conflict is something that you may find yourself being presented with. And I just think that being confident in being able to manage conflict is a tremendous skill to have as a coach. So let's have a look at this. So here's a lovely quote from the artist Leonardo da Vinci. And I think this is really about communication, but it's really about being aware of ourselves and what we're experiencing, being aware of others, what they're experiencing, being aware of the environments and how important it is as communicators that we are open to experience what we're experiencing or what others are experiencing. And as you will come to find out in this presentation, being aware, particularly of what others are feeling and what other people need, is critical to understanding what causes conflict, but also what we can do to manage it. The average person looks without seeing, listens without hearing, touches without feeling, eats without tasting, moves without physical awareness, inhales without awareness of odor or fragrance, and talks without thinking. So in terms of the learning outcomes for this particular presentation, so by the end of this particular presentation, you will be able to appreciate the importance of being able to identify and acknowledge your client's feelings and needs. And you will also be able to apply this knowledge and this understanding to your ability to build a positive, constructive relationship with those you work with. Communication comes so naturally to us. It comes so naturally to us that it is easy to engage with it without giving it a second thought. This is unfortunate because the more aware we are with regards what and how we communicate, the more likely it is that we are going to be able to communicate effectively. Some take communicating for granted, but some give it a lot of thought and consideration. One American psychologist who gives the way he communicates a great deal of thought is Marshall Rosenberg. Rosenberg founded a process called nonviolent communication, a communication process that helps people to resolve their differences through exchanging information in a peaceful, non-confrontational manner. And he travels the world working with people in an attempt to help them resolve their conflicts. The example I'm about to give you of how he does this is particularly pertinent today because of the tragic events that are currently unfolding in the Middle East. So I think it's particularly fitting that we're able to look at how Rosenberg works because of the events that are affecting us all today. So a good example of the way that Rosenberg works involves a trip that he made to the Middle East. He was invited to attend a mosque in a refugee camp in Bethlehem to talk to 170 Palestinian Muslim men on non-violent communication. Attitudes towards America were hostile at the time, and Rosenberg sensed a certain amount of tension and discomfort amongst some of the men. His translator informed him that the crowd were whispering that he was an American. A man suddenly jumped to his feet. He faced Rosenberg face on and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Murderer!" Immediately, a dozen other voices joined in shouting, "Murderer! Assassin! Child killer!" One of the central tenets of non-violent communication, as taught by Rosenberg, is that everything a human being does, whether benign or hurtful, is an attempt to meet their human needs. Rosenberg decided, therefore, to focus his attention on what the man was feeling and needing. He had noticed, for example, on his way to the camp, several empty tear gas canisters that had been shot into the camp the previous night by the Israelis. The canisters were marked with the words "Made in the USA." The refugees clearly harbored a great deal of anger towards the United States for supplying this tear gas to Israel. Rosenberg then addressed the man who had called him a murderer. And he said to him, "Are you angry because you would like my government to use its resources differently?" And then he says, I didn't know whether my guess was correct. What was critical was my sincere effort to connect with his feelings and needs. The man responds, "Damn right I'm angry. You think we need tear gas? We need sewers, not tear gas. We need housing. We need to have our own country." Rosenberg responds saying, "So you're furious and would appreciate some support in improving your living conditions and gaining independence." The man responds, "Do you know what it's like to live here for 27 years, the way I have with my family, children and all? Have you got the faintest idea what it's been like for us?" Rosenberg responds saying, "Sounds like you're feeling very desperate and you're wondering whether I or anyone else can really understand what it's like to be living under these conditions. Am I hearing you right?" And the man responds, "You want to understand? Tell me, do you have children? Do they go to school? Do they have playgrounds? My son is sick. He plays in an open sewer. His classroom has no books. Have you seen a school that has no books?" Rosenberg responds, "I hear how painful it is for you to raise your children here. You'd like me to know that what you want is what all parents want for their children: a good education, the opportunity to play and to grow in a healthy environment." The man responds, "That's right, the basics. Human rights, isn't that what you Americans call it? Why don't more of you come here and see what kind of human rights you're bringing me?" Rosenberg responds, "You'd like more Americans to be aware of the enormity of the suffering here and to look more deeply at the consequences of our political actions." The dialogue continued for 20 minutes, with the man expressing his pain and with Rosenberg listening for the feelings and the needs behind each statement. He didn't agree or disagree. He didn't judge, nor did he evaluate. As Rosenberg says, "I received his words, not as attacks, but as gifts from a fellow human being willing to share his soul and deep vulnerabilities with me." The man eventually felt he was being understood. He, in turn, listened to what Rosenberg had to say about why he was visiting the camp. An hour later, the man who had called Rosenberg a murderer invited him to his home for a Ramadan dinner. Such is the power of communication when we get it right. Marshall Rosenberg believes that human beings are essentially kind and compassionate, but that we have a tendency to lose sight of this. He is interested in what disconnects us from the better part of our nature, leading us to behave in a violent and exploitative nature. What, for example, allows some people to stay connected to the better part of their nature, even under the most trying circumstances, when others are unable to do this? What, for example, turns a good person evil? Rosenberg's preoccupation with questions such as these began during his childhood, around the summer of 1943. Rosenberg had moved with his family to a district in Detroit during a time of great civil unrest. Not long after they arrived, a race riot broke out over an incident in a public park. More than 40 people were killed. Rosenberg found himself living in a part of the neighborhood that was at the center of the violence, and the family were more or less imprisoned in their apartment for several days. Eventually, the troubles subsided and Marshall was able to attend school. During registration, when the teacher called out his name, Marshall noticed two boys glaring at him. One of them snared, "Are you a kike?" Rosenberg had never heard this word before and had no idea that it was an anti-Semitic insult. After school, the same two boys waited for him and they beat him up. Rosenberg didn't hate the boys for beating him up. On the contrary, he was fascinated by why they did what they did. He found himself thinking about why it is that some people would want to behave violently towards others, and also why is it that other people like him decide not to? Rosenberg is aware that while some people can be violent and hateful, some people can show extraordinary levels of kindness, compassion, and understanding. People like Etty Hillsham, who remained compassionate even while suffering the most appalling degradation in a Nazi concentration camp. In her diary, Etty wrote, "I am not easily frightened, not because I am brave, but because I know that I am dealing with human beings, and that I must try as hard as I can to understand everything that anyone ever does." And that was the real impact of this morning. Not that a disgruntled young Gestapo officer yelled at me, but that I felt no indignation, rather a real compassion. And I would have liked to have asked this young man, "Did you have a very unhappy childhood? Has your girlfriend let you down?" Yes, he looked harassed and driven, sullen and weak. I should have liked to have started treating him there and then, for I know that a pitiful young man like that are dangerous as soon as they are let loose on mankind. Rosenberg is struck by the powerful role language plays in our ability to be either kind, forgiving, and compassionate or not. Whether or not we really listen to others plays a crucial and critical role here. The method he devised, nonviolent communication, is a method of communication, a method of communicating, a method of speaking and listening, which enables people to connect to each other in a manner that is mutually beneficial to both parties and which allows compassion to flourish, hence the approach being called non-violent communication. Communication, as we have seen, is the glue that holds so much of our lives together. How we choose to communicate will either build or damage our relationships. The teacher, psychologist, and psychotherapist Chaim Ginott reflected very accurately on this on this particular element within communication when he famously said, "I've come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It's my personal approach that creates the climate. It's my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess tremendous power to make a student's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, a student humanized or dehumanized." Ginnett understood perfectly well the important role communication plays in developing positive relationships. Our communication style, as he says, can either hurt or it can heal. It can bring us closer together or it can push us apart. Ginnett was also aware of the importance of the words we use, how we choose to express those words. He was also profoundly struck by just how important it is for us to engage in a form of communication that is respectful of all those involved. This includes listening empathetically to others, being accepting and respectful, and listening with clarity. It's important, according to Ginnett, that we value the contributions others make to the conversations we have, that we listen with interest to what others are saying, for example. In essence, we all need to talk less and listen more. We need to validate the feelings of others, to accept others for who they are. And if we do have a problem with others, we should make it clear that it is the person's attitude, their behavior we don't appreciate, that we don't have a problem with them personally. Their behavior may be a problem, but they aren't a problem. We may not like their behavior, but we don't dislike them. Negative judgmental statements should be avoided, as should other potentially damaging attitudes, including rudeness, sarcasm, a lack of patience, or put-downs. Ginnett reveals his humanism, his humanistic interest in arguing that effective communication cannot take place in an atmosphere of fear or intimidation. And so it's critically important that the subject, the student, the client, the person sitting opposite us, our partner, feels relaxed, safe, valued, and accepted. To help stress the distinction between the person's behavior and their character, Ginnett suggests we use words like I. We use I statements. I think, I feel. Sentence starters as opposed to you. For example, I feel frustrated when you come late to my sessions, as opposed to you frustrate me by coming late. This can help preserve the relationship when the behavior or the attitude of the other person can be a challenge. Bearing in mind that we are trying in so many cases to encourage clients to change unwanted and unhelpful behaviors and attitudes, it is worthwhile, therefore, being skilled in those communication skills conducive to encouraging positive behavioral change. You know, I feel frustrated rather than you frustrate me. If I say I feel frustrated, I'm taking ownership of my emotions. I'm not blaming them on you by saying you make me frustrated, because actually you're not frustrating me. If I experience frustration, then that's something that I'm doing. I'm creating that frustration. So what's really good about Ginnett's work and his language use is how he's very cautious about not blaming others for the way that he feels. Ginnett, in addition, had a very specific attitude towards praise and encouragement. He was essentially against punishment. He felt that punishment was basically counterproductive insofar as the person receiving the punishment thinks, following the punishment, that they have paid the price for the mistake that they have made. leaving them free, therefore, to misbehave again. That said, Ginnett was also keen to limit praise as well. Rewards should only ever be given to those who genuinely deserve them. We need to be effective communicators. We need to be influential, and we need to be able to persuade in a manner which, it goes without saying, is ethical and in the best interests of all those concerned. Fostering positive, empowering change in others is a process that needs to be owned by the client and yet facilitated by a skilled professional helper. Amongst the most important skills any professional helper needs are those of the effective communicator. So here are the references to the 3 presentations that I've supplied for you. Have a little bit of a think about what Rosenberg was saying about listening to the other person's feelings and needs, and how sensitive he was to the anger that was felt by that Palestinian man.